Hi everyone, I'm Laura, Herts and Middlesex Wildlife Trust's Nature Reserves Manager, and I'm here today to talk to you about trees. It's the perfect time of year to get out and about in your local town or area of countryside to have a look at our amazing beautiful trees as they come into leaf in the spring. So today we're going to talk about 4 different trees that you can find in your local area. And the first one of those is the oak tree. So we're all familiar with the beauty of oak trees in our countryside, and they're easy to identify with their lobed leaves that we'll all be familiar with, and obviously acorns, which is their seed. And they have this wonderful rough bark that you can see behind me. So we often refer to oak as English oak, but there are actually 2 different types of oak trees in Britain, and those are pedunculate oak and sessile oak. And when they have their acorns, they're easy to tell apart. The word sessile means stalkless, so the acorns on sessile oaks don't have stalks, but the ones on pedunculate oak do. So they're easy to tell apart when they have their acorns. Oak trees are absolutely amazing. So they live for about 1,000 years, and each individual tree can be home to hundreds of species of wildlife, things like insects, birds and fungi. So our second tree species is ash, and ash can be identified by its bark. So it's got this wonderful bark with kind of vertical lines going up and down it. It looks a bit like oak bark, but a bit smoother, and it often has a kind of orange hue to it. And ash leaves are very distinctive. So one leaf is actually made up of lots of little leaflets, and they sit opposite each other on a leaf stalk. And this is what we call a pinnate leaf. And ash buds are also very distinctive. Ash has these big black buds that kind of look a bit like a hoof. Ash is one of our last tree species to come into leaf in the spring, and it's also one of our first to go bare in the autumn. And a great fact about ash is that most of our plant species are hermaphrodite, so they have both male and female reproductive parts within one tree. Ash is what we call dioecious, so each ash tree is either a male or a female tree. But interestingly, ash can actually change sex each year, and some ash trees have branches on them that are of the opposite sex to the rest of the tree. So our next tree species is beech, and beech has a wonderful smooth bark, kind of looks a bit like skin, and it has these lovely elliptical shaped leaves. They're kind of hairy around the outside but with a smooth edge. And beech lives to about 250 years old, so it doesn't live as long as oak trees do. And you might be able to see around me that the area underneath beech trees is quite shady, and that's because of the way the tree holds its leaves in this flat horizontal way. But it's really important because beech bark is really thin. And like all trees, beech has its cambium layer just underneath its bark. So the cambium layer is the part of the trunk in the tree that has all of the cells for growth and the really important cells that transport food and water up and down the tree. So with beech bark being very thin, it's important that the tree's canopy creates a shady atmosphere underneath, because that way it protects the beech's cambium layer from sun damage. So our last tree species is the birch tree. Now we're all used to seeing the lovely silvery trunks that you can see behind me, silvery patches that are nice and smooth with big raggedy chunks of bark in between. And birch trees have these distinguishable leaves. They're kind of little triangular shape with jagged edges and a nice point. But there are actually 2 different types of birch in our countryside. We have silver birch and we also have downy birch, and they both look quite similar. They both have the silvery patches on their trunks. Now they can be told apart, and it's easy to do by looking at the canopy as a whole. So as you can kind of see next to me, these leaves are hanging down. They're weeping, a little bit like weeping willow, and that's a sign that this is silver birch. It's got all of the leaves kind of hanging downwards. Downy birch holds its leaves more horizontally away from its stem. And you can also tell silver birch and downy birch apart by looking at the leaves themselves. So on silver birch, they're much more of a distinctive triangular shape, whereas on downy birch, these edges will be much more rounded. So when you're out and about in the woods, you might also see a bracket fungus on birch. Birch polypore is a very, very common bracket fungus that you see all about in the woods, and it's also called razor strop fungus. And the reason for that is that the kind of velvety texture of the fungus used to traditionally be used for finishing razors. And birch polypore is found on dead or dying birch trees, and it's a really important part of the ecology of the woodland. Birch trees only live for about 70 years, so not very long in tree terms. And when they die, they open up the canopy in the woodland and they let light onto the forest floor, making way for saplings of other tree species such as oak.